Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mark Von Schelwitz, and I'm Vice President, Western Canada for Restaurants Canada. And I'm pleased to welcome everyone here today for today's announcement. It's great to be here because we have a new government that is taking action to get Albertans back to work. As you know, the last few years have not been easy for restaurateurs and for all Alberta businesses in general. But I'm encouraged by the plans that Premier Kenney has shared with the business community to get more Albertans working. As a representative of Alberta's $11 billion restaurant industry, I look forward to seeing the actions Premier Kenney and the new government are taking as they work to support our industry's 11,000 plus Alberta businesses and our 150,000 employees. Restaurants are critical to the well-being of communities across Alberta, contributing jobs, investment, innovation, and tourism, and spaces for people to come together. When restaurants thrive, so too the communities they serve. I anticipate this will be welcome news, so it's a great pleasure to host this news conference today, which I anticipate will provide some welcome relief for restaurateurs and other small businesses across the province. To both Premier Kenney and Minister Copping, thank you for bringing this announcement and all these people to first round today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Premier Kenney.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Well, I took my notes there, Mark. Cheers. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you very much, Mark. And let me thank Mo Blaeways for welcoming us here to first round. Great Alberta small business. And I know that that first round has had to, like so many other small businesses, have had some challenging years, but have struggled to survive in a challenging economy and to overcome. One of the reasons for that challenging economy in recent years were government policies that made it a lot more expensive to hire people, to employ people, to create jobs. I've always said that small businesses are the unsung heroes of our economy. Businesses like Mr. Blaeways, they put everything on the line. They often will go and take out a second mortgage and work 80 hours a week just to keep going, even in particularly in difficult times. But in recent years, we had a government that raised taxes on businesses like this all across the province. The carbon tax, higher business taxes, higher income taxes, higher payroll taxes, higher WCB premiums, and municipalities and the province raising property taxes as well. All of that making it more expensive to hire people and to run a small business. On top of that, we saw massive new red tape and regulation, much of it embedded in radical changes to Alberta labor law, and including a 50% increase in the minimum wage in the middle of a recession when people were losing their jobs. Now, that's one of the reasons why we still have nearly 200,000 unemployed Albertans and why we've seen a huge decline in youth employment in particular. We see this especially in the restaurant industry. Mark can give you all the stats, but the average Alberta restaurant employed 13 people just 4 years ago. That's down to 11.7 people now. You add it all up, and that means 10,000 fewer people, typically fewer young Albertans working in the hospitality industry, which is so often the first step in the ladder to a lifetime of employment. And more deeply than this, we've seen a huge decline in the number of young people looking for work. It's called the labor force participation rate. That's down to 62%. It used to be well north of 72%. So that what his bottom line is, many fewer Albertans, young Albertans looking for work, many have given up even looking for work. And we have something like 30,000 young Albertans who are unemployed, who are looking for work. We need to get those young people back to work, and that's why today I am so pleased to announce the introduction of the Open for Business Act, one of the key elements of our job creation strategy to get Alberta back to work. Minister Copping will provide details, but let me just highlight a few of the changes that that will make it easier for job creators to do what they do best, create employment. First of all, the Open for Business Act will bring fairness and balance back to the workplace through common sense changes to rules on general holiday and overtime pay. Forcing employers to pay holiday pay on days when their businesses weren't even open makes no sense. And so that will end. And employees complained a lot about the recently imposed strict rules on banking overtime, so that will end too. To be clear, people will continue to pay time and a half if they're asked by their employer to do overtime hours. That will always be the case. We'll continue to protect overtime pay. But if an employee wants to go to their employer and ask for a couple of days off or a couple of extra hours on their shift when times are good, let's say in a restaurant business, they should be allowed to negotiate that with flexibility with the employer. Those were the rules that were in place in Alberta until just over a year ago, including for the first 3 years of the NDP. This will mean greater flexibility for employees and more hours so that in hospitality businesses, they can generate more tip income. This bill will also keep reasonable changes that were made by the NDP government on things like compassionate leave, and so we will continue to protect those important changes. The Open for Business Act will also restore fairness and democracy to the workplace by restoring the mandatory secret ballot voting for union certification. So what the previous government did was to say that if enough people signed a card presented to them by a union organizer, that workplace would be automatically unionized without a secret ballot vote. This opened the door up to intimidation and bully tactics. We saw this happen, for example, at a construction site in Calgary where some new Canadian workers with limited English language skills were basically bullied by union organizers into signing certification cards with all sorts of threats made against them until they later realized they'd been basically pushed into a union without their knowledge and against their will. We cannot let that happen again, and that's why the Open for Business Act requires a mandatory secret ballot vote before a workplace can be unionized. Who could possibly be against workplace democracy? The bill will also create a program that provides support and advice to all unionized workers so they can fully understand and exercise their rights within unions, and it will provide support to non-unionized workers to help them fully understand and exercise their rights when they are approached to join a union. So a lot of this is about empowering workers. In addition to Bill 2, today we're taking action to make it easier for young people to get jobs, to get that work experience that will set them up well for life by creating a youth job creation wage at $13 an hour for students under 18 who work full-time. This is based on a very similar program that exists in Ontario, which has lower unemployment amongst youth, and we think it's a common sense balance. This will enable job creators to hire more young people who are just starting out in the workforce. It'll help them gain job skills and experience that will lead to opportunities for higher pay. So to get as many young people as possible back to work as soon as possible, we are passing an order in council today so that the new minimum wage, the youth job creation wage, will take effect 30 days from now. We hope and expect this will immediately boost youth employment, including for students looking for summer jobs. Promise made, promise kept. It's been less than a month since our government was sworn into office. Already, we've introduced Bill 1, the Carbon Tax Repeal Act, that will save taxpayers $1.4 billion. Today's tabling of Bill 2 and our introduction of the youth job creation wage is the next step in getting Alberta back to work. It reinforces the message that we're sending to job creators and investors that Alberta is open for business again, and we're open for job creation. Stay tuned for much more to come this week, and now I'm going to hand it over to Minister Jason Copping.
Thank you very much, Premier, and I'm here to answer any of your questions that you may.
You don't have a statement, so I'll
Yeah.
go for
Okay.
it. No, he's the expert, but
Go ahead, Emma.
Excellent. Yourself.
Great. Although you're having a thing at a bar on a nice sunny day on that patio.
patio this,
Yeah.
Thanks
That's
for
where I'm going
nothing, guys. Okay, I did want to, on Bill 2, you've got this notion with the student wage. I'm curious about who keeps track of who is a student and who isn't, and how this won't create more red tape and bureaucracy for employers, because that's another thing that you guys are trying to do.
Yeah, so this is actually, these are, employment standards are minimums. So it's actually up to the employees and the employers to actually work out how that works. But we haven't seen any issues with this. We base this on the Ontario model, and they've had that in place for quite some time, and they've had no issues in terms of working through those types of items.
Would there be any penalties for, say, if a student just decides they don't want to tell their employer that they're a student so they can get paid more? Would there be penalties for those kids?
Yeah, we have nothing in the Act on that. It's basically up to the employer and the employee to work that out and then set the appropriate wage.
Okay, thanks. And Premier Kenney, quick question on this was raised in question period today. The NDP wants a special prosecutor of the RCMP investigation here. Your Justice Minister was speaking with the RCMP over the weekend. Do you not think the NDP has a leg to stand on here about appointing a special prosecutor, given that Schweitzer has been talking with the RCMP about this?
Again, this is a policing matter. We respect the independence of the police, and they can and should do their business independent of any government interference. We fully respect that and will continue to do so.
So no to a special prosecutor?
We're allowing the police to do their work, cooperating where they require, but respecting their independence. We see no need to change the way the system works, and has worked well in Alberta in the past.
Thank you.
Couple questions. First of all, is there any plans on the horizon to get a hospitality wage like other provinces has?
We will be appointing a task force to review exactly that question, to a commitment that we made in our platform. There are, I think, 3 other provinces that do have differential minimum wages for workers who receive gratuity income. Recognizing, I believe Restaurants Canada estimates that, is it about a third of the income of servers is from tips on a national average? So recognizing that, many hospitality workers tell us that they would prefer to have more hours so they can generate more tip income. And one of the perhaps unintended consequences of the 50% increase in the minimum wage was that a lot of hospitality employers cut back hours. So the task force will be charged with looking at that issue. We'll be asking them to consult with hospitality business owners as well as their employees. Because frankly, in developing the platform, we didn't have enough hard data to make a clear decision about whether most hospitality workers would be better off. That's our bottom line. We would only make that change if we conclude that the majority of servers would actually be better off in their net income through increased hours with the differential wage. So that's what the task force will be looking at, to try to get to the bottom of the detail of the data on that question.
Okay, and then something else unrelated, but we received a letter this week from a Catholic school that was handed out to students, a permission slip sending them to the pro-life rally. You said before that you don't really feel comfortable with students doing politics during school hours. So is there some kind of disconnect between the Premier's office and the Education Minister?
Well, look, it's not for the Premier's office. This is exactly the opposite of the NDP. I don't think that a Minister of Education, let alone a Premier, should be micromanaging what schools and school boards decide to do. I was asked about a unscheduled protest that people were involved in, and I said it's commendable that young people want to be involved in public issues. Good on them for that. But if it's not a school-approved activity, I think that's a different thing. But we'll leave that up to schools, school boards, principals, and others to decide. I really don't think the government should be micromanaging every decision scheduling decision that's made by every school.
You can see how there seems to be a little bit of a double standard there.
Again, we'll leave it to schools, school boards, and principals to decide what activity kids are involved in. And I do encourage young people to be involved in political debates and activities. I think that classroom instruction hour is important. Obviously, some schools are going to have different kinds of activities. I respect the decision that schools will make in this respect.
We're going to go to the phones. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
Sorry, Tom. I thought you were...
Operator?
maybe there's no one there.
Okay, go ahead, Tom.
Our first question comes from Rick Bell, Calgary Sun. Your line is open.
Yes, I'm definitely here. Over the weekend, there was news reports quoting the teachers union and others saying that there will be all kinds of calamities that will befall the school system if you don't spend as much on education as the NDP did. Premier, how are you going to counter these arguments? They've only just begun, well ahead of your budget, but they've only just begun, and they're going to continue, probably unabated, for 4 years, and they're going to come from teachers, their union, other unions, the NDP in question period today. How do you counter this argument that you're being very nasty to the school system?
A couple of points, Rick. Firstly, Alberta has, I believe, the most expensive education system in Canada, measured by per capita spending on education and per pupil grants. So to suggest that maintaining the highest relative level of spending on education in Alberta is, as the NDP claims, slashing education funding is ridiculous. Secondly, Rick, the NDP added hundreds of millions of dollars to the education system supposedly to reduce class sizes, but class sizes actually went up. So maybe we should ask ourselves, where's the money going? Why are we getting worse outcomes for more money? See, here's one of the problems for the NDP. They are so compromised by their special interest friends and by their blinded by their ideology, that they just think more and more and more money is always the answer. We prefer to focus on the outcomes. And where you've got the government spending record amounts of money on education and the highest amount of money in Canada while the class sizes grow, should be seen as an indication that something's not working right here. And that's why we're going to be launching an inquiry into an investigation into whatever happened to that class size reduction money. So I guess I would say to people, let's get as much bang for the taxpayer's buck as we can. Of course we want to, and will support high quality public education. Our platform was clear that we are guaranteeing stable or increasing funding for the education system. And that will become clear in the weeks to come.
You have a follow-up, Rick?
So, yes, just a quick follow-up to the Premier again. What would you say to these people, whether they're in the teachers' unions or certain parent groups or whatever, who are already saying things like, band will be gone and drama will be gone and class sizes will be used and schedules won't be flexible and teachers won't be able to connect and special needs students will be disadvantaged and on. And even the Premier mentioned the choice between 40 kids in a class and 50 kids in a class. I mean, how do you counter this? Because, as I say, this is just the beginning. This story will continue day by day and week by week and month by month. How do you counter that? What would you say to them who insist on this idea that the schools would be seriously harmed?
Well, that's what the same groups have already been saying under the NDP, which has massively increased funding and which put in hundreds of millions of dollars to reduce class sizes while class sizes went up. So, always spending more does not always generate better outcomes. Any smart government would ask, why is it we're spending more to get less? Why are we spending more for bigger class sizes? And secondly, Rick, all of those scenarios you just outlined sound an awful lot to me like the so-called RCMP musical parade story in Ottawa. Every time there's a discussion of even modest fiscal restraint in the national government, the Department of Public Safety proposes that the RCMP musical ride be cancelled because they know that no government will do such a thing. It's like whenever a municipal government talks about even modest fiscal restraint, it suddenly becomes a debate about shutting down all the swimming pools and libraries. I don't think that is, those kinds of scenarios are a distraction. Surely we can get more bang for the taxpayer's buck, starting with a look at the administrative costs in the system. Tom.
Go ahead, Tom.
The platform spoke about not opting into political contributions through your union wages. It also spoke about what was the other end of that one? The replacement worker ban. Thank you. They aren't in this piece of legislation. Are those still options
Yes,
still on
yes.
the table, or
So we are. There will be a second series of amendments to the labor code brought forward by the government in the fall. We haven't even been in office for 3 weeks, and some of these are very complex legal issues. And Minister Copping determined that he and his officials needed a bit more time to draft those provisions correctly. We don't want to make any mistakes. We don't want to rush into. We're making as many changes as we think we can prudently make at this point, to send a message about job creation. But some of those other provisions will be taken up in a second labor bill this fall. Do you want to add to that? That covers it.
Secondly, the NDP says you're picking the pockets of workers with these changes, lower wages for youth. Instead of time and a half, it's straight time, bank time. How do you respond to that? That is lower wages.
No, it's not lower wages. There's not lower wages in terms of the banked overtime. It's all about giving employees the flexibility to get better hours. And I'll give you an example. If you're working at a restaurant like this, and it's super busy, but you've hit your maximum hours for the day or the week, and you say to the boss, "I'd like to work an extra 4 hours to maximize tip income." Well, in challenging times, very often the boss is now saying, "I'm sorry, I can't afford to pay a time and a half." In the past, until last year, the employee could come back and say, "Hey, boss, listen, I know I'm going to make a couple $100 more on tips. Could you please give me those 4 hours and I'll work at regular pay rather than time and a half?" That empowers the employee voluntarily to enter into an agreement with the employer when it is manifestly in the worker's benefit. It's a flexibility tool that we've always had in Alberta until just a year ago. By the way, the NDP didn't think it was a problem. They didn't run against this, and they didn't change it until they were 3 years in. On the youth job creation wage, look, $13 an hour is a heck of a lot more than $0 an hour, and that's the option here. We've got 30,000 young Albertans out of work. We want to get them their first job experience. We're talking about part-time teenagers who are typically in high school, working typically 20 hours a week or less. Right now, the NDP priced a lot of them out of the labor market. And there is an awful lot of research, economic research, that the first job as a teenager helps to set people up for a better life of employment opportunities. So we think this is really important. And I would also point out that a 14-year-old working their first part-time job in Alberta at $13 an hour will be making more than adults in almost every province whose minimum wages are below $13. And that $13 is still substantially higher for a 14 or 15-year-old here, part-time, than was the minimum wage two years ago. So this is still a very generous wage, but as I say, $13 an hour is a lot more than $0 an hour, and those are the people we're focused on, those who can't find a job right now.
Graham, go ahead.
Mr. Premier,
Who are you
different
working
topic.
for now, Graham, by the way?
Sorry?
Who are you, are you still with CBC, or is it iPolitics?
iPolitics.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
I honestly, I didn't know. I was just,
oh, okay.
You'll never retire, eh?
Well, I've retired from Post Media, not from the media. Different topic. Last week, you've been quoted as saying that when it comes to climate change concerns, it's a flavor of the month. Did you say that climate change concerns is a flavor of the month? When it comes
No,
to
I was
investors?
referring to a particular interpretation of the ESG, environmental and sustainability investment matrix, and my point was that major institutional investors look at different criteria for ethical investments, and that we will be challenging those investors to include in their investment matrix the treatment of women, workers' rights, human rights generally, conventional environmental regulations, as well as indigenous treatment of indigenous people. So really what we're saying is that the single-minded focus on one issue excludes a lot of other important ethical criteria for an investment. And this is where we end up with companies like HSBC boycotting the Alberta energy industry while they're holding investment conferences in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a country that that stones women who are accused of adultery. This is the HSBC, that is the major provider of credit facilities to Vladimir Putin's heavy oil industry. So our point was that there should be a more holistic approach to ethical investment, and the current single-minded focus on one issue is not serving those investors well.
Just to follow up on climate change, looking at the wildfires burning right now in Alberta, you got scientists saying we can expect to see more floods, more forest fires linked to climate change. Do you accept that? When you look at the forest fires right now burning in Alberta, there's been several years of major forest fires. Do you see a connection between what's happening now and climate change?
Well, I certainly accept the scientific consensus on anthropogenic causes behind climate change, and that's why I believe that our Canadian governments must do their part to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We'll be demonstrating that through the adoption of our levy on major industrial emissions, which we hope will reduce CO2 emissions by about 40 megatons, and doing that without punishing people for heating their homes or filling up their gas tanks. But neither I nor anybody can identify every single incident and its connection to those. There have always been forest fires. They're back before human contact. There were forest fires that took millions of acres of forested land. What's different now is that we put out these fires and the forests grow very old. In the case of the fire near High Level, the wildfire agency in the government of Alberta has been expecting this for a long time, because it's apparently been about 80 years since there was a fire in that area. So there's a lot of built up fuel that's basically just tinder there. So I'm informed that the current incidence of active wildfires in Alberta is on average for the past 5 years. And I want to commend the folks who are doing brilliant work to combat that fire. I have some good news to report. We've now gone through about 28 hours of the winds blowing towards the town of High Level, and it appears that all of the defenses that constructed by the structural firefighters have been successful, and there is growing confidence that the town will be safe. We'll continue to work with the local officials on that, and as I say, on the climate change issue, we will certainly be taking responsible action with our tier fund.
I'm sorry, not very clear. So do you accept as a link, scientists say as the climate warms up, there'll be more fires, more floods, we'll see more extreme weather. So do you accept as a link there?
I accept that the science on anthropogenic climate change and the need to reduce CO2 emissions, and that's why we'll be acting to do so. But in this particular instance, I can tell you that we're on the 5-year average for forest fires in Alberta, for wildfires. And the large one right now is happening in an area where there has not been a fire for 80 years. And so, regardless of other factors, it was due eventually for a large wildfire.
Quick question about the bill. For the last 2.5 years, you've spoken about this 17-year-old kid in Hardisty who came up to you, was supporting his entire family. Does it not seem slightly ironic to you that now you'd be cutting his wage were he a student?
No, first of all, I'm pretty sure that young fella was...
He'd be older now.
Yeah, he would be. Pretty sure that young guy was making a lot more than minimum because he was in the oil field. So, and that's something that we should remember, which is that average incomes for youth are much higher in Alberta than other parts of the country, in part historically because of the energy sector. But no, I would rather ensure that a young person has that first job than no job. And that's really what this is all about. This is about the young people who are dropping off their resumes at businesses like this, but not getting the callbacks because the government priced them out of the labor market. Please understand that when you're, for 14 and 15, 16-year-old first-time hires with no paid work experience, employers have to provide additional training and supervision for them, which is another implicit cost. So when you also raise the minimum wage rate by 50% to $15 an hour, and you add on top of that the imputed cost of supervision and training, a lot of those teenagers have been priced out of the labor market. So we're simply trying to get them back in into the labor market. That's why we're doing this. They do it in Ontario. They do it in a lot of jurisdictions, even in Australia, right? They do. Yeah.
Right.
All right,
Thanks a
thank
lot,
you, guys. Appreciate it. I'm going to the patio for a beer. Thank you. Is that okay?